A pleasure to meet all at last, and today it is Saturday, and I feel like that in response to the last video, it only does seem fitting that I do cover the whole trilogy of Jurassic Park. I feel like that with a good majority of people having requested me to do the first film, why not follow up with the others? In this case, we're going to go ahead and jump to 1997. Pretty much the big point of the franchise in which it not only saw big success in the marketplace, but also another film was put together with increased budgets and with some new locales to visit. The Lost World Jurassic Park, which the title itself was a bit confusing at the time. To some people out there, it was just more of a shameless way to not say Jurassic Park 2, but to a good majority of experts like myself, The Lost World happens to be a bit of a retrospective reference, in a way, to Arthur Conan Doyle's famous 1925 black and white film. But it also happens to give us insight as to some bits and pieces of what the original Jurassic Park novel had shown us. After all, while Michael Crichton himself was well known for regarding the first Jurassic Park and the lore established within the storyline, the idea of a sequel itself was a bit of a different story. Obviously we have Spielberg in on the act again, so we don't necessarily have any sort of convoluted production BS going on. Unlike some franchises that I've even talked about before, such as Air Bud for instance, as soon as Disney saw what some other companies had tried to do with their beloved classic 1997 film, they were more than reluctant to get the franchise back under control in their own favor. And they were able to do a better job over time. But you know what though? Even with Spielberg's involvement throughout all of the films, at least from what the first trilogy gave us, it didn't at all help much in terms of getting the sequels as good as what the first film's success brought us in the box office and by critics, and even praise by Michael Crichton himself. In any case though, the storyline of The Lost World Jurassic Park does take place sometime after the events of the first Jurassic Park film. After the survivors of Isla Nublar escaped, we have ourselves a different story to uncover. However, this is the point where we don't get to see Alan Grant or Ellie Sattler or basically a good majority of the original characters that we saw from the first film. Not even Hammond himself, at least by some definition, he doesn't necessarily make all that much appearances in the second film, apart from some brief instances, mainly on TV. So, that's pretty much one thing about The Lost World Jurassic Park that didn't necessarily help in its success. It was basically a different thing altogether. The title was one thing, but the story was another thing. The film itself does start, at least in a certain familiarity, but it wasn't necessarily Isla Nublar related, no. This was just a certain beachfront with a certain family that we've had no recollection of, nor understanding of. But, however, we are at least lured into a point where a young girl goes into the forest and finds a little Compsognathus out and about. She calls out to her parents, but then terrifying screams come around. The girl was apparently attacked, and while we are not shown the grim reality of what is going on, the mother screams out. And this is basically where we cut off, straight to Jeff Goldblum's own Dr. Ian Malcolm. Yep, we at least have one big character from the first film, although he didn't at all serve that much help in terms of what the first film's plot went together. He was mostly just there, sitting around, and basically an injured victim of the T-Rex's rampage. But here in the second film, they actually give him more proper treatment, as more of a protagonistic role, rather than just some accomplice alongside what the protagonists were able to do in the first film. It was mostly about Grant and Sattler in terms of the heroics, as well as the lead-offs of the adventure that ensued because of what had gone wrong with Jurassic Park entirely. The park itself, the security system, the computering, you know, it all went wrong throughout that point. But as for The Lost World, we have Dr. Malcolm, whom is basically on his way over to meet up with Dr. Sarah Harding, as well as his daughter, Kelly. The thing is that what we saw in one instance of the first film, a short scene involved him and Grant sitting inside one of the Ford Explorer tour vehicles, and they were sharing some liquor while Malcolm did basically tell Grant that he had some kids, and he also was occasionally married, and that he was, quote unquote, looking for a future ex Mrs. Malcolm. But here in the second film, we do at least get one type of glimpse into what his relationship status is, not only with a wife, but also with a child, a daughter of his in particular, whom is basically a fan of his work as a paleontologist and whatnot. But in this instance, this definitely goes to show that with all the different wives he's had, all the children that he's gotten a hold of, and all the other things that have gone on in his lifetime, he certainly is somebody whom is different than most other people would be. You have one marriage, you have a bunch of kids, that's usually what the formula plays out. But for some of us, it's a bit different. Some adopt, some have multiple wives and multiple kids as a result of this. Wives and kids coming from different sources, yeah. It's a bit of a weird mix-up in this instance. But a lot of times I do try to not allow that to confine me into a point where I don't want to understand the film's plot anymore. I just simply let it roll on. However, this is basically the point where a lot of the introductions to the characters eventually start to turn off into a different direction. Because, what happens? We head on back to a certain familiar spot in the film's plot. Yeah, basically, a new island is put together. A new plot is set up. And a new firm is installed, of which that a certain company is hoping to get a hold of Jurassic Park in the form of an entirely new attraction here. Because what goes on in the second film is certainly something rather exciting, but it's definitely not like what the first film had given us. No, instead of a computer shutdown, we're sent right into the action here. Yeah, it's not exactly about suspense or build-up or anything like that. We're just dropped straight into the action here. Because, why not? At least in this instance, we do get to see a good variety of dinosaurs here, as well as different vehicles. Remind you that Jurassic Park and Mercedes-Benz, at this point in time, pretty much went well together. Kind of like peanut butter and jelly, or Hall & Oates, or pen and paper. You know, you couldn't really go very far without seeing Mercedes-Benz sponsorships, cross connections, and many points of advertising that they put together. And surprisingly, even to this day, Mercedes-Benz holds a very special place in the hearts of Jurassic Park fans. And I almost feel like that could be my next automobile if Duncan, a Nissan Juke, ends up falling dead for whatever reason. Anyways though, the big part of the film here that we're introduced to is the variety of different characters. The characters that mostly play off in the team player that goes together would include members such as Eddie Carr, Nick Van Owen, and even the main headmaster himself, Peter Ludlow. Of course, we can't go very far without mentioning the actors. You have Vince Vaughn, for example, who plays Nick, Arliss Howard as Peter Ludlow, and even Pete Postlethwaite as Roland Tembo. Of course, apart from many different actors that go together with the film's plotline and the stories that unfold from within, you really got to talk about the scenery that they put together through here, as well as the many effects. A lot of the old effects that we've seen from the first film are still around, and some animated bits, including some CG, are sometimes used to allow for the effects to come to life in a bit more effectively. After all, with practical effects, they were able to execute with the first film quite well, but in the second film, they seem not as reliant on the old effects, opting to use similar effects that other films were taking place in. After all, 97 was a point where CG, while it wasn't perfect still, they were at least hoping to do more with it than just make a film out of it. Yeah, if Toy Story wasn't enough, as it had come out 2 years prior, I don't know what could happen. We definitely can't go far though without talking about a certain something that gets involved. A baby T-Rex, whose leg ends up injured, and is eventually taken over to a nearby RV. This RV in question does house a special trailer laboratory hybrid, of which that is mainly used for conducting experiments, as well as giving necessary research, and is even equipped with various state-of-the-art technology. Lots of different Mercedes-Benz vehicles, and even some militarized vehicles have been put together especially for these types of expeditions out on the island in particular. But we definitely can't go very far without mentioning the fact that the baby T-Rex is not alone in any situation. Because apart from some encounters with other dinosaurs like Stegosaurus and Ankylosaurus, the T-Rex comes back. And it even has a mate. Yep. The baby was one thing, but now you got two adults out on the run and mad at these captors, if you will. Yeah, apparently these people were hoping to score some points by getting dinosaurs and bringing them over to the mainland in the hopes of creating a Jurassic Park 2.0. Because as a certain scale model shows in one particular scene, Ludlow especially is hopeful to create this new park in the hopes that in San Diego, California, it could probably do even better than what Isla Nublar's park could have been like, had it gone well. But all of us know by this point, it's not going to end well. And it's not just in the terms of somebody who's bound to hack the system, even though he's not really much of a problem anymore. No. You have the likes of Dr. Malcolm and Dr. Harding. And even their child, Kelly, is not at all very content on the idea of such a grand scheme like this. In any case, though, one night when the rain comes down, baby T-Rex is still held in the trailer, still crying out in pain because of its injury. Two T-Rexes, though, appear, and while the baby was put back, handed to them, they still aren't satisfied. They have to shake the RV around, topple it over, and knock it off of a cliff. Thankfully, Eddie Carr comes in. And while he's not exactly armed with his trademark rifle, yeah, the Lindstrat air gun is a powerful weapon and was even made possible to kill dinosaurs in one shot. That is certainly impressive. But let's be real here. Do we expect such a powerful weapon on a pretty massive T-Rex? I mean, even Roland wasn't very confident on this idea. Obviously, we know that the team is pretty messed up, but they do try to survive the way that they should. And while the likes of Malcolm, Nick Van Owen, Harding, Kelly, they all follow closely behind this team in the hopes that they can not only score a ride back to the mainland, but also try to find out what the heck to do. Especially because even though Eddie was able to help rescue the others from that trailer, just dangling off the side of the cliff face, he unfortunately becomes a victim to a T-Rex rope toy tug of war. That at which it does unleash a pretty funny scream, at least, from him. And of course, those vehicles end up completely destroyed. At least the others are able to make it out thanks to some rope. And while they didn't get their burgers and apple turnover as they were promised earlier, yeah, they at least were able to get out of there. And the rest of the guys were up there congratulating them. Yeah, that baby T-Rex was certainly one thing. They were able to prevent major casualties, though. Unfortunately, they ended up losing Eddie in the process. This is basically where we get ourselves a bit of a journey set upon, where for some time, at least 35 minutes would pass, where they're in the island, out in the jungle, and hoping that they can survive. There's plenty of viscera that take place, and a lot of scenery that does in fact require a lot of tense action. And you can really go for this whole period of time just wondering, are all these guys going to make it? Or are they just all going to fall victim to the dinosaurs that are out there to hunt them? You got one guy who is being pestered and eventually mauled to death by a bunch of compies. And then there's another scene in which they're all asleep, even with some tents set up. The T-Rex comes back And then there's this guy that just starts a big panic. He just screams at the others to get up and start running for it. But we know what happens, right? Even Ian Malcolm did not appreciate that move. Yeah. The T-Rex's vision is based on movement. We know that's not true. Still. But they still try to make their way out, and while some of them are able to thankfully escape the clutches of the T-Rex's massive jaws and avoid being crushed underfoot, some aren't so lucky. One guy gets crushed, one guy gets chomped up after a snake enters his clothing, and he ends up going outside of the waterfall cave. Harding gets licked by the T-Rex's tongue. Oh man. Thankfully, Malcolm is able to reunite with the others after being separated. How he managed to get past the Rex, who really knows? But I guess you could say he's a pretty lucky one there. In any case though, we're eventually being brought back to the point where Ludlow's operation commences in the city of San Diego, California. And well, the likes of Ian, Sarah, and the others do make it back to the mainland after some time passes. But yet, more trouble is brewing. As they do wait in the mainland, a ship is bound to arrive at the harbor, basically loaded with the captured dinosaurs, including a T-Rex. So, this is tempting fate, as one might pretty much have it. We definitely also should remember that the Velociraptors, or Raptors for short, also do make an appearance in this instance. And there's a whole scene where they're all just playing acrobats, chasing each other around. Kelly goes for her gymnastic skills and kicks a raptor out the side, impaling it. And then, of course, there's a point where Sarah is just fumbling around like human pinball, hoping to get out of the way of the likes of the raptors. At some points, though, the raptors just bicker at each other rather than go for Harding. Yeah, it's just madness in this whole instance. And this is all just to try and find where the heck Nick Van Owen went? Yeah. Who would have thought? They get separated and they try to find each other again, only to find raptors instead. Talk about running into a trap. But yeah, back to the harbor. The ship, unfortunately, doesn't slow down for the harbor, and instead smashes right through. And, well, when they board the ship to see what the heck happened, apparently, there actually was supposed to be a scene that would take place on the ship itself. And it would actually help to explain why the crew was unable to respond, or why the ship crashed. And it's apparently because a good majority of the crew was torn to shreds. A hand is sitting on the steering wheel of the ship, and then there's even a hand with a remote control meant for lifting the cargo hatch open. Of course, somebody is stupid enough to basically open the hatch, because what happens? The Rex climbs out, and boom. You got yourself another dinosaur rampage. This time, however, coming as close to an American Godzilla film, at least for the time. I mean, a T-Rex rampaging through the streets of San Diego, invading someone's house, drinking pool water and eating a dog out of the doghouse, and then eventually chomping up the traffic lights and going after a dude after he tries to enter a store. You really have to be very jealous in order to not appreciate something of this magnitude. In any case, though, Harding and Malcolm aren't far behind, and they even have the baby T-Rex with them. Peter Ludlow, of course, still is on the verge of trying to get the two back together, as in the Rex and the baby. Because after all, he doesn't really have much use for the adult, but for the baby, it seems like a pile of gold for him to just take away. However, with the heroics made possible by Malcolm and Harding, they make sure to keep the baby far away from Ludlow's clutches. And on top of all that, once they do finally get a hold of the baby, it's unfortunately badly sedated, as it was contained in a quarantine facility, which supposedly prohibited anybody from trespassing. Otherwise, they'd be prosecuted. But hey, they're driving around in a red convertible, smashing their way through the gates, getting the baby back, and threatening to run people over. And the only way to stop them was apparently to get shot by the guards. So of course, The Rex's rampage does continue until it eventually does spot the baby, in the hands once again of Malcolm and Harding. They do drive through some warehouses, eventually abandoning the car in the hopes to get back to the ship and to get the Rex back into the cargo bay of the ship itself. After all, they just couldn't have dinosaurs on the rampage, and they definitely couldn't have Mr. Ludlow getting his hands on that baby. And well, when all is said and done, Ludlow himself does in fact enter the ship itself, not realizing that the baby was actually out and about. Yeah, it fully awakened by this point. And, believe it or not, when the adult comes around, he does grab Ludlow by his midsection, injuring him, and he's unable to get away. But the baby is the one that kills him. Yep. Talk about an impressive turnaround of events. I mean, you got a baby who was injured and defenseless to a baby whom has managed to grow strong and mighty enough to eat up a guy. And who would have thought that of all people that it could have chosen for its first target, it was the man behind this whole master plan all along. Yeah. I would say, unlike with Dennis Nedry, Ludlow doesn't exactly come off as that big of a villain here. I mean, Nedry caused a lot of hell to uprise in the first Jurassic Park film, all by shutting down the computers and security systems and hacking a majority of the database. While Ludlow, in this instance, he does come off as pretty convincing, setting up some sort of master plan for a Jurassic Park 2.0 to take place in the mainland rather than on a certain island that's miles away from the mainland itself. But let's be real here. It's John Hammond who was truly behind Jurassic Park as a whole. And Ludlow, seemingly wanting to be some kind of successor, was just hoping to get his own cash. And with his own team and his own crew and his own scientists on the brink of getting their own share of the bargain, a majority of them either turn up dead or missing, eaten alive by raptors, compies, rexes, etc. So, you really got to think about the whole turnaround of events that took place here. Over the course of 2 films, these Jurassic Park movies have definitely shown us you could certainly execute ideas of all types. In a more modernized to contemporary realm of events, they definitely hit us pretty hard with a supposed remake of The Lost World, as why else would the title be called The Lost World Jurassic Park? It has a lot of the original Arthur Conan Doyle The Lost World vibes to it, as it's a T-Rex in the city of San Diego, much like that Brontosaurus in The Lost World. But above all that, this was a great sequel by any means. Some people might not appreciate it all that much as the first film, but let's be real. We don't need Dr. Grant or Sattler to execute all this much here. And apart from the lack of John Hammond, apart from especially the very final scene where he explains, life will find a way. As that ship sails aboard with that tranquilized T-Rex as well as its baby back to the island, we're certainly left with a powerful, compelling message that Hammond himself, although he was partially responsible for the idea of Jurassic Park, he certainly has a lot more plans to allow dinosaurs to roam free in their own way, in their own secluded land of the entire world. With that in mind, I'm going to give this a good scoring of 8.4 out of 10.1. I find this to be a great sequel for what it is, and apart from some drawbacks and some bits that were a bit missing, I will certainly agree. The idea of this taking place in the mainland, while it's a concept that has been around for a while, mostly being made popular of a dinosaur attacking civilization because of the likes of such media from way back in the day, about a century ago, we can definitely agree that with them modernizing this approach, they were not only able to grow to new heights with the Jurassic Park franchise, but they were also able to, in fact, implement ideas that even future films were able to give us, sometimes even better than Jurassic Park 2. But you know what, though? We're still not quite done yet when it comes to Jurassic Park films. We do have one more contender that, while it certainly did not do all that well in most ways, it at least gave us a whole new feel of Jurassic Park as it is. So much so, it killed the king of the dinosaurs. But more on that tomorrow on Sunday. So I'll see you guys then. And make sure to like, subscribe, comment, follow me wherever you can find me, and stay on the Hollywood side for more.
Whenever I want, I usually get, and I'm thinking I want you, but I don't have you yet. I ain't got no tricks to be playing on you.